God made the world and all its wonders for man to explore. And there are countless wonders just outside your front door. Now join natural world photographer and journalist Roger W. Downs as he shares the stories of the people, places, music, and cuisines he has discovered as we explore with RWD.
Hello and welcome on in. I'm Roger W. Downs, your host, and today we are going to explore one of the nation's top zoo and conservation facilities. Located in central North Carolina, south of Asheboro, is the North Carolina Zoo, who has won world acclaim for their variety of species and conservation efforts. But most zoos across the nation have similar accolades. So what is the special sauce that makes the North Carolina Zoo stand out? Public Relations Officer Debbie Foster-Fuchs.
I think the secret sauce is it's the size. You get to see animals in natural habitats that are replicants of where they would live in the wild. We don't have, animals in those old school zoo traditions and cages. For example, our prairie, where our bison and elk live, they live on 13 acres of natural land. We have about 3 overlooks where you can try and view them. But you are viewing animals in their natural habitats. And it's just beautiful out here. It's 500 acres. It's 5 miles of walking trails. So we really are more than a zoo. We're a day out in nature.
However, it won't just be exotic wildlife you'll see during your visit. Curator of Herpetology, Dustin Smith.
So if anybody has spent any time in any state park or any kind of national park, it's the same here. When you're walking down our trails, they're mostly shaded and you feel like you're walking through one of those parks, but you can also see animals that are not found right here in North Carolina. I mean, you can also see lots and lots of native wildlife on our pathways, from turtles and snakes, and I've seen foxes, coyotes, deer, skunks. I mean, again, everything that you can think of that lives in this region, you can see wild at the zoo, but also when you're walking around the zoo, you get those great experiences as well.
So what type of animals will you see during your visit to the North Carolina Zoo? Debbie Foster-Fuchs.
Well, we have 2 areas of the zoo. We have the continent of North America, which, represents the animals of the Americas. We have polar bears, we have seals and sea lions. I mentioned bison and elk. American red wolves. We are the 2nd largest breeding facility of the American red wolf, which is the most endangered canid in the world. Then we also have the continent of Africa and all the species you would find there. And that's where you're going to find your rhinos and your elephants and your giraffes and your primates, your chimps and your lemurs and your gorillas.
Typically, when visitors attend a zoo, they have a favorite animal in mind that they have come to visit. However, the North Carolina Zoo has discovered their visitors come for more than just the animals. Dustin Smith.
It's as much the habitat and the experience as it is an animal. Like you may go to this zoo to see this animal or this one to see this one, but I think, again, part of it here is the experience. When you come to the zoo and you go into our desert dome and you're kind of transformed into this desert experience, because you've got these massive cactus, you've got these really unique species that are found all around the world, from burrowing owls to kookaburras to porcupines and all of the lizards that we have in the building, rattlesnakes, a little bit of everything. But again, a lot of it's open air and it's an immersive experience, much like our aviary is. So then when you leave the desert dome, it's dry and hot. You go into our aviary and it's an amazing lush rainforest that you just walked into. So you get to experience different habitats just like that. And then if you continue on to Africa, our grasslands habitat is over 40 acres, which is, again, massive. I mean, that's larger than many zoos in the United States. And that habitat, you can watch rhinos and hoofstock just grazing as they would naturally. And we also offer a safari ride that's also immersive. So you've got these different experiences. And I keep using the word immersive because that's really how it is. We want people to feel like they're in nature, they're part of nature when they're walking through the zoo, but also when they go into these separate kind of micro habitat experiences.
And when visitors are in one of the zoo's immersive experiences, they probably don't even think about the teams of people it took to make the environment they are surrounded by come to life.
Our animal section includes all of our zookeepers, our supervisors, our curators that kind of maintain the animals to ensure the appropriate welfare. We make sure that everything is provided with them, and we want to be that facility that is leading the world in providing this care, right? We're not settling for what we did 10 years ago or 15 years ago. We're always progressively trying to make changes, improving the diets we feed. We improve the space provided, the lighting, if it's artificial. We want to look at every aspect and how we can improve that. So we've got all of our zookeepers, our veterinary technicians, our veterinarians that we work closely with every single day to make sure that we're providing that. But that's from the animal husbandry side. Then when you bump over to the horticulture side, we've got an amazing crew that not only maintains the plants that the guests see on the walkways, but then also within the animal habitats themselves to make them not only look natural, but make sure they're healthy because some of the animals are feeding on them. And then you've got our design team and our graphics team, which are providing that experience. And most people, when they walk through the zoo, they don't realize how much effort goes into making just one of those habitats. And one I'll just point out right now is, the desert area, which includes our newest ocelot habitat. And when you look at the desert dome inside and you see the rock work, and you know that every square inch of that rock work in that dome was sculpted by somebody by hand. It was sculpted, it was painted. They used photographs from around the world to make sure it was perfect. And they're very, very much perfectionists. If you ever meet them, they'll tell you every detail about that habitat, even if they were part of making it back in 1997 or wherever it was. They're great to talk to about those experiences. So I think I kind of tried to touch on a few different things there without talking about any one for too long. But I'm sure Debbie can say something else that I overlooked.
We really are a small city. We have a commissary that prepares diets for 1,800 animals. We have maintenance that takes care of a huge fleet of trams, trucks, golf carts. We have, on-site refreshments, a full restaurant. And we have about around 225 full-time permanent employees. But in the summer, we can go up to with seasonals, up to 600 people working here at the park to make it run. And there's so many different things that have to come together to make it run that it's really amazing just to kind of watch how this place operates.
And some of the animals at the zoo have found their way there through the facility's efforts to save wayward animals in distress. Curator of Herpetology, Dustin Smith.
We are in a unique situation, being one of few zoos that has a significant rehabilitation program on site. So, for example, if someone locally finds an injured, raptor or a small mammal, or again, right now, I don't even know what we have down there right now because it's constantly changing. But orphan black bears and otters are one of their specialties lately, working with our partners at the Wildlife Resource Commission. So the rehab center was kind of where I was wondering if you were going. So that's one thing we're highly involved with. We've got a phenomenal staff down there that actually trains people around the world how to rehabilitate animals. So we've got that great facility. But then as a zoo, we kind of go twofold. So being one of only 2 state-run zoos, we have different regulations that we have to deal with in legislation that require us to take in confiscated animals. So, for example, earlier this year, I think 2020 and 2021 just kind of run together, so I can't keep track of them anymore. But we had that confiscation of pythons. Some people may have seen that on the Nat Geo Wild TV show that we were featured on. But we had a group of large pythons that someone was not keeping correctly. It did not meet the state code requirements for keeping large constrictors. And so they were brought to the zoo. The zoo is required to accept any confiscated large constrictors or pythons if they meet certain criteria by state standards. So that's something that you never are prepared for. And then you just get that call that's always on a Friday at about 5 p.m. or over the weekend. And I get a call either on my office phone or my cell phone, and it's always Officer so-and-so from some county. And then then the process gets started. So we have to deal with those at least once a year. But bigger picture is what we have going on here at the zoo. And as Debbie said, more than 1,800 animals. Many of our animals are part of some sort of breeding program. Some are managed programs that we call SSPs at zoos, or species survival plans. And what that means is it's a program that's managed in zoos to ensure that the animals are receiving, or I shouldn't say they're receiving, their populations are being genetically managed to last as long as possible. And our key phrase there is we want to have genetic diversity in these programs of 90% genetic diversity for 100 years. So we're not thinking about what we're doing with our rhinos or our giraffes or our indigo snakes tomorrow or next year. We're planning for the next 100 years to make sure that these populations are sustainable at zoos and then hopefully as well in the wild. So the way we do that is by having project coordinators or program coordinators and stud book keepers. And for example, I'm a stud book keeper for the Puerto Rican crested toad. And in zoos in the United States, there's over 1,300 Puerto Rican crested toads. And I have a stud book with every one of those individuals. I know how old they are, where they live. And then we, about 4 or 5 times a year, we tell zoos which pairs they can breed to maintain that same genetic diversity that I manage. So there's a lot that goes into that. And in order to do that, we do have to send animals to other zoos and receive animals from time to time. It probably happens nonstop throughout the spring and the fall. The summer, things can kind of slow down just because it's hot and it's a little more difficult to transport animals. We don't want to always take those chances, but there's always the opportunity for us to bring animals in and out of the zoo as needed based on a breeding program or a new habitat that's being built or something like that. But we not only do this for the zoo, but as you mentioned before, we also do it in the wild as well. I mean, we'll talk about this later, but my role in the Puerto Rican crested toad project, only half of it has to do with zoo animals. I go to Puerto Rico twice a year. I do surveys for the species. I work very closely with the local government and the federal government to ensure the species' long-term survival. And I'm just one person at this zoo working with that species. We have others working with elephants and rhinos and vultures and gorillas, ensuring all the same thing. So while we have hundreds of partners to make sure we're successful and these species have these opportunities, I'm constantly letting our guests know that is something zoos do that we don't have the opportunity to tell people all the time, you know. And I think this forum's great for us. And as much as you can walk around the zoo and see graphics explaining all of that, and we put a lot of effort into those graphics, and our interpretive team and our graphics team are always trying to figure out what the best technique is, what height to put it at, what color, what font. Like there's so many details that go into that. But in the end, when someone comes to the zoo, there's only so many graphics that they're going to read, and we don't know that we're able to reach everybody just through that. So our social media, you know, Debbie and our marketing and PR team, our communication team are always finding ways to send the right messages and working with other media outlets to make sure that word's getting out there, because it needs to get out there in order for us to be successful and for your kids and my kids to be able to see all these species in the future.
I have something, a neat factoid. I was actually just up at the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center this morning, and we have 5 black bear cubs up there that are orphaned, and they're learning to bear, and they'll be released in the fall. So that's just kind of an example of what we do.
Again, our guests from the North Carolina Zoo in Asheboro are Public Relations Officer Debbie Foster-Fuchs and Curator of Herpetology Dustin Smith. When we return, we will dive into the heroic team effort by the zoo to save endangered species in their natural habitat.
Don't wander off now. Explore with RWD will be right back after this.
Hey y'all, it's Roger from Explore with RWD. And if you've been thinking about starting your own podcast, there's one spot you want to go to host it, and that's Anchor, because it is free. Free. That's right, free. And they have all sorts of great creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or your computer. And that is awesome when you're out in the field wanting to record a portion of your podcast, like an interview, and you can do it literally from right there in the forest talking to a ranger or a guide, like I like to do. That's why I love Anchor. Anchor will also distribute your podcast so you can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and the list goes on from there. And you can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. So the minute you record a spot, all you got to do is insert it and you're off to the races. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. So download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Natural world photographer Benjamin Walls.
When I was in Alaska at one stage taking photographs of the grizzly bears on the Alaskan peninsula, there was a bear that came out of the weeds, these really high grass actually, just beside of me, and he was roaring and running right at me.
Be inspired by this story and others from Benjamin Walls in episode 7 of Explore with RWD.
Welcome back to Explore with RWD.
Again, I'm Roger W. Downs, your host and a natural world photographer. So while you listen, please take a moment and view my photos at rogerwdownsphotography.com. That's ROGERWDOWNES photography.com. Now back to the North Carolina Zoo, where teams of researchers conduct heroic efforts each day to repopulate endangered species in the wild. And one of those many locations is just off the United States southeastern shore in Puerto Rico. Curator of Herpetology, Dustin Smith.
In Puerto Rico, most of our work has been with the Puerto Rican crested toad. I've been involved with that project for about 11 years now. And my main role in the project is to, I'm considered the vice coordinator and the stud bookkeeper for the species. And so not only do I help manage the population in zoos, but also I visit Puerto Rico twice a year, and I'm visiting all of our not only release sites, but the only historic sites where the toad exists. And right now there's only one natural population of Puerto Rican crested toads left. So that site is monitored. We want to make sure that they're continuing to breed so that there's some stability. But luckily, through the work of our zoo and all the other zoos in the United States that are involved with this project, there are at least 2 to 3 other populations that are starting to breed in Puerto Rico, because every year about 10 to 15 or so zoos actually breed and release Puerto Rican crested toads back in the wild. And we're one of those institutions. So hopefully in about 2 or 3 months, everyone in North Carolina and around will see a press release saying that we're releasing tadpoles, because that's our plan in October, November, fingers crossed. But we have done that for the last, I believe 2 of the last 3 years we've released back in the wild. So that's one aspect of it. But again, it's not just here and it's not just releasing. We also help monitor wild populations in Puerto Rico of the crested toad. And we have actually built habitat down in Puerto Rico for the toad. So because of the concern with sea level rise impacting the only remaining population, we've built 2 new wetlands in the Guanica National Forest in southern Puerto Rico. And those 2 wetlands are and will be used by toads in the future as sea level continues to rise. And sorry, I said are and were because the toads started using the ponds the first year after they were built. But unfortunately, that's the same area that was affected by earthquakes. So we don't know if we need to go in and do some more work on those ponds. There's still some evaluation that needs to be done, but that's what one of our next trips will be once COVID allows us to travel again. But again, that's one of the projects. And because we've been working down in Puerto Rico, again, I've only been going down there for about 10 years. Our partners have been working with zoos in the United States for over 30 years now. It's the longest running amphibian head starting project in the world. And there's been a tremendous amount of success, but there's always room to grow. There's always ways we can expand and improve. So we're constantly doing that. But because of that partnership that we have with the local government and the federal government, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Puerto Rican Department of Natural Resources, we've expanded our work to also include the Puerto Rican harlequin butterfly, which is an endemic species to Puerto Rico. And we're doing surveys down there right now to learn more about the species and answer some questions, because the species is likely to be listed very soon by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as endangered or threatened. So that's one project that we're doing only in Puerto Rico and not doing anything back at the zoo. But one other project, and I know I'm going fast here, but I'm trying to cover a lot. But one of the projects we're really excited about is our Virgin Island boa project. And most people think about a boa And first off, they think a snake. And what I always hear is, well, why are you saving it? It's a snake. But snakes shouldn't be treated any differently than rhinos or elephants or gorillas or chimps or any other animal in the world. Just because people are afraid of them, that's usually because of misinformation or misunderstanding or myths. Always lots of myths with snakes. We've all heard a lot, and we've all laughed at a lot of them over the years. But the Virgin Island boa is a species that has gone through significant population declines, mainly because of habitat loss. A lot of people like the Caribbean. They want to live there. There's been a lot of development, especially in the habitats where the Virgin Island boa lives. And so our project right now is, again, monitoring populations in the wild. So I've been to the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico to survey for the boas a handful of times over the last few years, pre-COVID. And we've established a population of boas at the zoo that we're going to eventually breed and release new populations in the wild. So kind of the same thing we're doing in Puerto Rico with the toads, we're going to be doing the same thing with the Virgin Island boa, which is an endangered species of boa. And it's one of the smaller species of boas too. So when people think of boa and they think of a 10 or 15 foot long snake, these guys are really small. They're less than 3 feet long, and they live mostly in trees, and they're very, very, very secretive. So again, those are just really, really brief points that that focus on our projects in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, but those are just one of many, many projects that we have at the zoo.
But as you can imagine, the repopulation efforts don't only apply to exotic locations. The zoo's research staff are also trying to save the North Carolina hellbender.
So hellbenders, first off, for people that don't know, are a really large, awesome aquatic salamander. And most people in North Carolina have probably never seen them unless they've seen them at the zoo or one of the aquariums or a science center. But they're this really large salamander. It looks very similar to the ones you would see on land, except they're much bigger. They're flatter. They spend almost all their lives underneath rocks because that's where they live, is in really pristine, fast-moving streams that are well oxygenated and cool. And again, I bring up the cool and well oxygenated part because you're not going to see them a lot in the Piedmont and the coast because, well, not only do they not occur there, but because our rivers are a lot different than those amazing rivers in the mountains, which those have the habitats that the hellbenders need. And so we started years ago, prior to me working at the zoo. The zoo's been involved with hellbenders for about 15 years. And it started by our staff working with the Wildlife Resource Commission staff to just learn more about them. Again, not a lot was known about hellbenders in North Carolina. And they did about a decade-long survey. And over the course of that survey, they found a lot of sites that didn't have hellbenders that were unaware of before. But unfortunately, they also learned over just 10 years that a lot of their populations were already declining. So because of that, our goal right now is to continue to do these surveys so we know what's going on with hellbender populations in North Carolina. Most of the losses are because of habitat degradation. What happens is whenever there's a lot of road construction, development, bridges, things like that around those pristine streams, those rivers really get silted. And when those get silted, all those really cool big rocks that hellbenders live underneath, those are becoming full of silt. Any of that soil, debris, runoff, anything like that is just filling up those den rocks with silt, and that's going to alter the habitat enough to where hellbenders are going to need to find somewhere else to live. Or what happens is the water then becomes polluted because of, again, runoff from roads, runoff from farm fields, and so those are impacting the populations. So that's why we're doing these surveys, to learn where they're existing in sufficient numbers, where we need to be concerned with hellbenders, and then in areas where they're more concerning, where populations may have declined, or maybe there's a big gap in the population, right? So let's just say there's a spot on the French Broad River where there's hellbenders north and there's hellbenders south, but there's a big gap in the middle. What we're trying to do is find methods to connect the population. And one thing that we're doing specifically at the zoo is we're working in the New River to test the use of hellbender nest boxes. And we have these artificial concrete nest boxes. They weigh 100 pounds. They're absolutely no fun to carry into a river. They're back-breaking. You hurt your fingers, your toes, you hurt everything. But it's fun to work in the rivers, especially knowing that there's hellbenders around you. So what we're doing is we're installing these boxes. We're taking a lot of data to determine what it will take for hellbenders to feel comfortable to use these artificial nest boxes. And if we can ever find that kind of magic number in North Carolina, then we'll be able to apply that to connect those populations that are kind of disjunct. And again, that project is still kind of in its infancy. The first 2 years we worked on it pre-COVID were also years that North Carolina experienced record rains. For example, in, I believe it was 2017, 2018, we average at the zoo about 40 inches of rain a year. At least that's what I've been told. And those years we got 100 inches. So when a river gets 100 inches of rain, you can imagine, I mean, especially if you're from the mountains, you know. And actually with this recent storm we had, I heard the Pigeon River went up 17 feet in less than 10 hours, which is, I mean, an unreal number. It's just a staggering number when you hear things like that. So if we put a 100-pound box in a river and we partially bury it, we cover it with rocks, 17 feet of water is going to pick it up like a toothpick and throw it down the river and break it. So we always have those things that we're working against and we're learning about. So, you know, at no part of this research project would we say that we have all the answers, but that's all part of research. It's testing theories and try to find what works. And that's the stage that we're at right now, but it's still an exciting stage for us.
But what if you've never seen a hellbender before or even knew they existed? Public Relations Officer Debbie Foster-Fuchs.
We do have hellbenders here. We have a hellbender exhibit. So you can actually come here and try and see a hellbender. I go up there and I see guests and they're like, where is it? Where is it? Where is it? And sometimes they're lucky and they see one, but it's always interesting, especially with little kids, when they finally do see the little head pop out. They're like, oh, wow. Because these are very secretive animals and most people are only going to ever see a picture of them. They're never going to see them in the wild. And it's even hard to see them at zoos. So it's one of those really cool habitats where you just sit there and you kind of wait and you're looking for the animal because they completely blend into the rocks. It's crazy.
And along those lines, you know, the reason we designed that habitat is because we didn't have hellbenders on exhibit at the zoo, and we had done this work for so long. And so many people would ask us, what is a hellbender? What do they look like? I've never seen one, or, you know, so-and-so, my uncle caught one fishing one time. But we designed the habitat to show the diversity of rivers. So although the highlight species in there is hellbenders, you can see a dozen species of shiners and dace and chubsuckers and chubs. And it's really highlighting the diversity of those rivers because most people have never just taken the time to snorkel in the French Broad or the Davidson. And when you do that, you just see so many really cool species of fish and invertebrates. And if you're lucky, you'll see a hellbender or maybe even a water snake. And so that was our goal. And you know, we specifically did that because we also knew there was a good chance it was going to be hard to see a hellbender, or people wouldn't even recognize it because most of the time the hellbender's sitting in front of them. They just don't know it because they blend in with the rock so well, and that's why they have the camouflage they have. They're very cryptic, they're nocturnal, and so most of the time that's the other reason people don't see them is because they only come out at nighttime in most areas, and otherwise they're going to spend all their time underneath their rocks protecting their homes. But yeah, again, that's one of our projects in the mountains. But right here, kind of in our own backyard, we work with a species of state endangered frog called the gopher frog. And the gopher frog is I think it's a unique looking frog. Most people would kind of say it looks like most of the other frogs in the area, but it's a unique species. It has a lot of specialties when it comes to its breeding behavior and its habitats. But the gopher frog once occurred in North Carolina in about 50 populations, and now there's only 7 populations left. There's probably less than 1,000 gopher frogs remaining in North Carolina. So we started working with the North Carolina Wildlife Resource Commission about 5 or 6 years ago. I think it was 2016 to start head starting the species. And by head starting, our process is we go down to the Sandhills Game Lands, which is only about an hour south of the zoo. So it's a pretty quick and easy ride for us. And we catch up with the Wildlife Resource Commission staff down there. There's a technician down there named Mike Martin that we've been working with for years now. And every year in the winter, when gopher frogs start breeding, because they're a winter breeding species, it's kind of unique among most amphibians. Most people think of amphibians and they think about, oh, it's springtime, it's going to start raining, or summertime, and I'm going to start hearing spring peepers first. Then I'm going to start hearing gray tree frogs in my yard. And right around the time spring peepers are calling, the gopher frogs will start calling as well, and they'll start breeding. But they only breed in ephemeral wetlands that are in longleaf pine habitats. And about 98% of the existing longleaf pine habitat in the United States has disappeared. It's completely gone because of development. And within those habitats, is that ephemeral wetland. An ephemeral wetland is just a wetland that's temporary. It dries up every year, and it typically doesn't have predatory fish. And so if you're a frog, you like it because you're not going to get eaten, right? Nobody wants to get eaten. That doesn't sound fun. And so they breed in these ephemeral wetlands every winter. And so they go down to the river, to the wetland, to the pond. They make their call, which kind of sounds like a snore. And when they're calling, the hopefully females are nearby, and they start breeding, and they make these egg masses. And the egg masses of frogs are typically like a ball-shaped egg mass, right? Most people think about amphibians, and they think about just laying clumps of eggs, but toads, on the other hand, typically lay their eggs in long strands. And I just tell people that because that's just one of the differences that we typically see with frogs and toads. But they lay these big masses, almost like a baseball-sized mass, and we take a very, very small portion of those egg masses when they breed, maybe 30 or 40 eggs from those 400, 500 or more eggs. And then we bring them back to the zoo. At the zoo, we hatch those eggs, and after we hatch them, we keep them indoors for about a week or two because the tadpoles are super, super small. And in the wild, they would just be floating around and pretending to be debris just because they can't swim very well when they first hatch out. After that, we bring them outside. We put them in these outdoor mesocosms, which are 300-gallon tubs that are designed to be kind of a more natural setup. And we've got about 12 of these tubs that we fill up with about 50 tadpoles in each tub. And we raise them for about 3 or 4 months until the frogs start to morph out into what we call a froglet. And once we have a bunch of little froglets, we weigh them, we measure them, and then we mark them with a little tiny colored elastomer. It doesn't hurt the frog, but that way we know what year that frog emerged, and then we release them back into the wild. So for us, it's a great opportunity to use our experience as kind of specialists in animal husbandry, but then we're also directly helping the population of gopher frogs in the wild. Because as I mentioned, there's only 7 populations left, less than 1,000 of this species left in North Carolina, and I'm being generous with that 1,000. It's probably more like a few hundred. But, you know, it's just another way that we're able to help save a species that's really overlooked. I mean, most people in North Carolina have never and will never see a gopher frog unless they're at the zoo or another facility that maintains them. You'll never just see one in the wild because their populations are so small and because they're only in habitats that are a lot more pristine. You know, they're not going to be in a semi-developed area like maybe a gray tree frog on your house. So they're a species that's really unknown by most North Carolinians, but we're putting a lot of effort into helping save this species with our partners at the Wildlife Resource Commission.
The question you may be asking now is, how is a species determined to be at a threat level, and how are they chosen to be saved? Dustin Smith explains the process.
One of the things we do is we look at feasibility, we look at threats, right? And so, you know, right off the bat, there's 3 species of amphibians in North Carolina that are considered endangered. And of those 3 species, the gopher frog is one. The other one is called the ornate chorus frog. And that's a species we're also trying to head start, but we have not been able to find eggs for the last 2 years. So that tells you 2 things. Number one, they're really hard to find, but it also lets you know that they're just not in the numbers they used to be. So that's a clear sign for us. Something else needs to be done. But before you say, oh, wow, the species is almost gone, how can you save it? Well, the third species that I didn't mention is the river frog, and the river frog hasn't been seen since 1977. So it's hard to save that species because it's probably extinct, but that doesn't mean more can't be done to ensure that it's gone, but also maybe to even bring it back. But the priority for us really should be which species are most endangered, which species have the chance at recovery because, let's just say, threats. You know, if you're looking at threats, if a threat to a species is that it has to breed in this one pond and that pond is disappeared and now developed, then your only other option is either build another pond, or if that is not possible, then what are your other options? You don't have any other options. And so for us right now, the options with the gopher frog are we're going to continue to head start them because we know that we can raise them. We know that we can build more ponds for them to breed, which has been done recently. In fact, the site that we've released gopher frogs last 2 years is a brand new restored wetland. So this is a brand new opportunity for a species to create a whole new population. But other than that, it really depends on the threats. and what the resources are available to saving a species. That if it was up to us, we would love to save every species around, but we don't have the resources for it. And if we have the ability to combine resources like gopher frogs and ornate chorus frogs, or some other species, then we'll do that when it's possible. But again, we're pretty much prioritizing based on the status of the species, the threats, and also not just the status, but what is the population actually doing? Some species are considered endangered because they have a small isolated population. Maybe there's no threats. Maybe there's nothing that needs to be done. A lot of island species are endangered because there's only 1 or 2,000. But you know what? That 1 or 2,000, they've taken over that island. Like Komodo dragons, for example, are considered threatened or I think they're threatened, and that's just because they're an island species and there's a lot of them on those islands.
But it isn't just amphibians and reptiles that the zoo tries to save. Public Relations Officer Debbie Foster-Fuchs shares.
Obviously, we've had an interesting year because of COVID. Travel has been very limited or just non-existent, but we are slowly getting the chance, our researchers are slowly getting the chance to travel again into Africa and Thailand and places like that. We are very involved with the black rhino population in Africa. We're very involved with helping save chimpanzees and gorillas. One thing that we have done in collaboration with some other zoos and wildlife organizations is create an anti-poaching software called SMART. So this is software that rangers in Africa that are actually, on the front lines can go in and report poaching activity in real time. So what that does is it helps kind of narrow in if there's a poaching problem, they can send authorities in, and it's really helping, really curb, that, unfortunately, people think that rhino horns have some kind of magical component to them. They don't, but they think they do. And of course, you always have the problem with elephants and their ivory. So we're actively involved in Africa with several species. We're actively involved in Southeast Asia with some species. And again, it's, when you visit the zoo, we want people to come together and have a great day out with their families and their friends, but also understand that your ticket purchase and anything you purchase in the gift shop or even the food that you buy here, a portion that goes to all these conservation programs that we do, not only here in America, but all over the world. And it's interesting too, like when you had asked about who decides who's endangered, who's threatened, who's extinct. We work with an organization called IUCN, it's International Conservation Network. I believe that's the correct name for it. And they do research upon research about these populations out in the wild, such as polar bears and seals and the different species of rhinos. And in fact, they actually declared the northern white rhino extinct 3 years ago because the last male died. There's 2 females. Without a male, they can't make any more. So it was basically considered extinct. I think they are working on with some embryos and such to maybe that they can bring that species back. I don't know all the details, but that's one organization people can visit to find out more information about if it's threatened. But there are other organizations that will use their own criteria, such as World Wildlife Fund, U.S. Fish and Wildlife will, to decide what the threatened status is of that animal.
If I could just jump back in there too, to kind of echo what Debbie was saying, people don't realize, when you visit the zoo, you're helping support these efforts. You're helping support conservation efforts around the world, whether it's with hornbills in Asia or, our projects in Puerto Rico or gorillas, chimps, everything. It's supporting the zoo's mission, and it's directly helping our conservation programs. And so, and we're not one of the zoos out there that's just taking that money and sending a little bit of money to support this project or a little bit to support that one. We're only typically involved with programs that we're actively involved with. And, for example, with IUCN, not only do we support a lot of the efforts based on IUCN recommendations, but we're also the ones making the recommendations. So we have staff at the zoo that are actively involved with the IUCN through what's called species specialist groups. And species specialist groups are the ones that are working to decide whether or not a species is considered endangered. And the way they do that is by creating action plans and by having meetings, and we're directly involved with those. I was in an action planning meeting, two action planning meetings last year to determine the status and the future conservation plans to determine what's necessary for the silver boa in the Bahamas and for the Virgin Island boa and obviously the Virgin Islands. And so it's not just something that we kind of talk about or we read. We're actually involved with that process. And it's not just me, obviously. We have a conservation and research team at the zoo that consists of 5 individuals directly that are involved with conservation and research as far as managing it at the zoo. But then obviously we have a lot of our staff that's directly involved with many of these programs. So there's so much that we can say. I just really wanted to touch on the fact that every time a zoo guest comes to the zoo, even if they don't realize that they're directly helping us with the mission. And that's been especially helpful since we've reopened post-COVID. We've had a lot of great attendance. Our numbers have been really spiking, and Debbie can speak to the numbers more than I can. But what's most important about that is it's helping our overall mission, and it's helping the zoo, and it's obviously in turn helping the conservation projects and the species that we work with. So yeah, I wanted to kind of echo that because that's a really, really important aspect.
And that brings us to our next question. What are some of the wins that the North Carolina Zoo has accomplished with their conservation projects? We'll continue our conversation with Public Relations Officer Debbie Foster-Fuchs and Curator of Herpetology Dustin Smith next.
Explore with RWD. We'll be right back after this.
Hey, it's RWD here again, and when I'm out exploring new areas, I always take my camera along with me because I'm also a nature and wildlife photographer. And you can see some of that imagery at explorewithrwd.com, but more importantly, I want you to experience it the best I can provide it to you. And that's why I usually grab video of waterfalls, forests, and any place that can help you just reconnect with nature through either your cell phone, your laptop, your tablet, or even your computer. You can find my YouTube channel at explorewithrwd.com.
That wasn't too bad, now was it? Welcome back to Explore with RWD.
Again, I'm your host, Roger W. Downs, and a natural world photographer. And if you have some time, please swing by my photo website at rogerwdownsphotography.com. That's ROGERWDOWNES photography.com. I love sharing God's artistry with you as I capture it with my camera. But let's get back to the North Carolina Zoo and some of the wins that their conservation efforts have accomplished. Again, Curator of Herpetology, Dustin Smith.
I mean, for me, I think the wins are, to date, we've released over 1,500 endangered gopher frogs back into the wild, and that's in the last 5 years. And not only have we released them, but we've been doing very small research projects along the way to make sure that we are improving our efforts and our success and our efficiency and effectiveness. And that information has been shared with other partners who have also become more successful. So I think the win is not just directly doing it. It's now we've got partners in South Carolina that are doing this work, and they had an amazing year this year at one of the facilities in South Carolina. So I think there's kind of a double win there. I think to say that we've released literally thousands of tadpoles of endangered Puerto Rican crescitodes back in the wild. I think the work that SMART has done, they've received numerous awards for that work. And when you really hear about it, people at first are not as excited when they hear about a computer program that's being developed. But when you hear the impact that it's having and the fact that the rangers in the regions that they're using this, which most of our efforts are directly in Africa, but the SMART program's used around the world, they're able to show that they're having an impact. They're able to show the amount of traps and snares they're removing. They're able to show the overall ground they're able to cover, and they're able to track all of that and share that with the world. That's that's pretty valuable information, and it's kind of overlooked sometimes because it's a program, but in the end, it's directly helping species in the wild and in the anti-poaching movement.
Outside the arena of conservation, there have been other wins for the zoo, especially since COVID has been pushing people outside. Public Relations Officer Debbie Foster-Fuchs.
We reopened in June of 2020 after a 3-month shutdown because of COVID, because we had to find a way, just like every other tourism, large venue out there, how to reopen safely. So we reopened in June of 2020. We had limited attendance. First it was 2,000 people a day, then we went to 3, then we went to 4. And the whole idea was to lessen the amount of people coming through the gate at any one time. And so people could safely social distance while out in the park, even though it is outside. Fortunately, because of, the more research about COVID, and then recently with the vaccine implementation, as of July 1st this year, we were able to just go back to general admission ticket sales. You didn't have to have a reservation to come to the zoo. There was no capacity limits. So even in June of this year, when we still had advanced reservations, we had a record June since we've been open since 1974. We had the most people walk through our gates in June than ever before. And July, we just got the numbers for July, and it was a record July as well. So since we've ever been opened, our whole history, June and July have been record months for attendance. So it's been great. It's been great to have families back in the park and people just getting out and about. You can purchase tickets the day of. If you decide that morning you want to come to the zoo, you can go right up to the ticket gate, purchase your tickets, and come on through. You also can buy online tickets. There is a slight advantage to buying online tickets because you get in a faster line to show your ticket. So that can be if that's a concern for someone. So you can, and that way you just have to show the ticket on your phone and you get in. But we're here every day of the year. We're open every day of the year except Thanksgiving and Christmas Day. Some people think we close during the winter. We do not. I mean, the zoo is open year round for everyone.
But what can you do if you want to give more to the North Carolina Zoo, especially for their conservation efforts?
We make it very easy for people to donate to us. We love donors and we love money because it goes all towards our conservation efforts. We have a fundraising side to us called the North Carolina Zoo Society, which is our nonprofit that raises money for us. So you can donate directly to them. Also, you can donate to a general fund, but if you do have a certain affinity for a species of animal that maybe is near and dear to your heart, you can also donate to specific animal species projects, such as Dustin's projects or the American Red Wolf Project. Or if you're interested in saving rhinos in Africa and you want to make sure your full donation goes to that, you can earmark all of that. We have other fun ways you can donate. You can buy, what we call adopt an animal. For example, my mother-in-law just absolutely loves puffins, so we adopted a puffin for her birthday. And she's just thrilled with that. She got her little adoption her certificate about her puffin and a picture about her puffin. And, you can do things like that. Also, one other thing too, if people don't necessarily have the funds to donate, but they have the time, we love our volunteers out here. I would say any given day on the weekend, 75% of people, staff on the park are volunteers that are helping out. And they serve as guides, they serve as interpreters at some of the animal overlooks, or just general help. They're like, where's the bathroom? And they can help you with that too. So, there's different ways to support the zoo. There's, donating money and donating time. You just visit nczoo.org and click on volunteer, and it'll walk you through our process. We have a wonderful volunteer coordinator, Toy Lambeth, who has been here for years. And she would love to talk to anyone that would like to volunteer.
But what if you have a degree and you want to work specifically at the North Carolina Zoo? Curator of Herpetology, Dustin Smith, shares some advice.
Yeah, so from the animal side, it's actually very competitive to become a zookeeper. If you think about it bigger picture, there's only 220 or so AZA accredited facilities in the United States. And if someone, really says, I want to focus my efforts on North Carolina Zoo, We post, again, we're a government entity, so we post them on the state website, but also everything goes on the aza.org website. That has all the job descriptions and all the information. But again, it's really competitive. I can say we will get, for one of our zookeeper positions, we'll have hundreds of applicants. And so the best thing to do is, if somebody's interested in a job in a zoo, especially if it's a zookeeper, is really do your background research, read job descriptions at various facilities, understand the expectations. A lot of times there are internships or even some college programs now that offer that opportunity. And sorry, I'm kind of going more specific down the rabbit hole of zookeeping, but I think zookeeping and becoming a vet are always the questions that I personally get the most questions about. So that's why I kind of just automatically go with that answer. But otherwise, Debbie can jump in and describe the actual process for where we post jobs. But again, from the animal side, we always want people that have animal experience, especially those that have had zoo experience and a bachelor's degree in a biological field. You can always visit nczoo.org careers, and that will list everything that is open at the zoo. Again, we're a state agency, so as you apply, you would become a state employee and all the benefits therein that come with that. But like I had said at the beginning of the podcast, we are like a small city. So people that are bookkeepers, people that are accountants, someone needs to balance all our books. People that are fundraisers, people that are in my section in marketing, people who know how to use social media and know how to write, people who want to be tour guides and help people. It just runs the gamut of all the positions out here, and it's really kind of moving when we do post positions that are in the administrative sector. The amount of applications you get of people that want to work for the zoo because they want to work for something they support and believe in. So it's always very heartwarming to hear that with applicants. And I think you see that too with a lot of our employees. When you walk through the zoo, and I don't know if you experienced this when you were here, or a lot of people just overlook it, but when you walk through our grounds, there's not a lot of trash. Now, part of that is because I think a lot of the guests appreciate and respect the facility, and that's the way it looks everywhere, so they want to keep it that way. But part of it is our staff, just the staff that's responsible for that. They take pride in it. They do a great job. They stay on top of making sure the zoo grounds look good, whether that's our environmental services team or whether that's just any of our staff walking through the zoo and seeing a small piece of trash or graffiti or picking it up or cleaning it up. It just comes back to the pride in the facility. And as bad as the pandemic has been, it has been a silver lining to places like the North Carolina Zoo. Dustin continues. I'm gonna echo something else Debbie said, and that is I think the silver lining that we're experiencing right now, not only at the zoo but also I think probably throughout the U.S. is that with COVID, people started spending a lot more time in the outdoors. And I think whether that is coming to the zoo or just going outdoors, I think people are starting to have a newfound appreciation for wildlife and for wild places. And so I hope that continues. And I definitely know that I've seen it, again, just in the state park side of thing. It's just like the zoo. It's busy all the time. Even on days and times when I wouldn't expect it, it's busy. And so I hope that we continue to see that and people realize that there's a lot of amazing opportunities out there to just experience nature, whether it's, again, at the zoo. We also have Nature Trail. If you come to the zoo, you can easily walk down our Purgatory Trail or any of the other trails that run off of that. And you don't have to come to the zoo and pay to get into the zoo. Maybe you're in town for the weekend and you want to do the zoo one day, and then the next day you want to go down the nature trail, and you may see, box turtles or deer, or if you're lucky, a snake. There's a lot of opportunities, and it's a great place to be. It's good exercise too. So there's a lot of opportunity out there. It's just whether or not we can keep people outdoors and not going back indoors. Debbie Foster-Fuchs echoes Dustin's comments and encourages you to come visit the North Carolina Zoo soon. Visit. We love our visitors. However, if for some reason you can't visit, there are other ways to engage with us. Follow us on social media, share and retweet the things that we do. You can leave comments on our post.
We have some really great online YouTube videos for kids and adults that they would enjoy. So any way that you can kind of engage with us online is great. I would be amiss if I did not mention National Geographic's Wild Secrets of the Zoo North Carolina. Is our 8-part documentary series that's on Nat Geo Wild. You can also get it on some streaming services such as Amazon Prime and Hulu. And that is amazing. If you really want to see what happens behind the scenes at the zoo, you will see it there. In fact, when I watched the series, I saw things that I had never seen, and I work here. So it is very interesting. So I highly recommend to watch our series.
So get your tickets in advance now for the North Carolina Zoo at nczoo.org. Again, I'm Roger Downs, your host and Natural World photographer. I want to thank our guests again. That would be Public Relations Officer for the North Carolina Zoo, Debbie Foster-Fuchs, and Curator of Herpetology for the North Carolina Zoo, Dustin Smith. Please go visit and make a difference for conservation, not only in Western North Carolina, but around the world, because every time you visit, you help to save an endangered species. And if no one else has told you this yet today, I love you, and I know the good Lord above loves you. He has promised you that, so make sure to count your blessings, because life truly is good. I know we've all gone through some really tough times as of late, but trust me when I tell you, the good Lord is working on miracles in your life. So until next time, peace, love, and coon dogs, y'all.
Thank you for listening. Visit us online at explorewithrwd.com to discover more about Roger, his photography, podcast, and adventures. Or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Explore with RWD. Remember, we didn't inherit the earth from our parents. We borrow it from our children. May God bless you and yours. Now get outside and go explore. Explore with RWD is produced by Downs Media Incorporated. All rights reserved.